Hello guys, welcome to the channel. It's your boy EO here. So before I say anything, I'm not giving financial advice, I'm not giving investment advice. So why am I thinking of Kenyan citizenship? What are the reasons? And it's not just because I like the passport. It's because I feel like I'm more than a tourist in Kenya. All my life, I'm used to living in the UK. I was born in the UK. And every time I go to an African country, whether that be Kenya, Cape Verde, I always feel like I'm a tourist. And inside, I feel like I'm actually a part of, Kenya. I'm a part of, any other country in Africa because of my African heritage. And because I'm Nigerian, I still feel like I'm a part of the African continent. And me being from the UK, there's still a division between who I am and my African roots. Just from the fact that I don't have a Nigerian passport, I don't have a African passport. The only passport I have is a UK passport. And yes, you can argue and be like, well, the UK passport is good and there's so many countries that you can live in. Yes, that's true. But what happens if a world war happens, I need to have a backup plan. And I feel like the UK is going downhill, is basically finished. The economy is absolutely shit. Even the pounds, yes, it's still a strong currency, but it's going down in value. The same thing with the dollars. And I don't want to be in the UK when that happens, I want to be in a different country, preferably Kenya. I don't want to experience the downfall of the UK. And that's why I'm considering eventually getting Kenya citizenship. Whether I might have to stay there, be a resident for a couple of years, I might have to do that, I don't know. And I feel like because I've grown up in the UK all my life, I feel like the UK has lost its appeal to me, I don't really seem fascinated by the word UK, I don't really, like, if someone tells me to come to the UK, I'm like, what do you mean, bro? I'm already in the UK, and it's a shit country, it's an absolutely down the hill country. It's pretty much like America. The only difference is America is much bigger. No change has happened. So obviously I have not just, decided and be like, oh yeah, I want to get Kenyan citizenship. No. I've done research on the country before I came, and I've been looking into the, potential growth of Kenya, and looking at the country and just trying to see for myself if it's somewhere where I would want to live. And so far it's it's ticked all the boxes. So one of the main reasons why I'm thinking of getting a Kenyan citizenship eventually down the line is because I'm tired of my country and I feel like I'm not wanted. There was a time where I went to university, and because my university is outside London, it was mostly like only just white people, Caucasian people living outside of London. And I experienced a really bad experience. I had a really bad time. There was a time where I went to a supermarket and this security guy, just, wrongfully accused me of stealing something because of my race, because of the fact that I was black, and because he saw me as basically a criminal. That's the way the media in the UK, in the US, they always portray black guys as the bad guy, as the criminals, as the murderers. So now all of a sudden they all think that we're the same, I'm not saying everybody's like that, but that was personally what I experienced. And it just made me realize that, wow, I actually don't belong in the UK. And the fact that my own people, someone that also grew up in the UK, and we're both the same. I grew up in the UK. For someone to be rude to me like that and actually accuse me for something I did not do, yeah, it just made me feel like I felt out of place, And because it was a all-white area, there was a very few black people in the area I was in university at. And yeah, it made me feel like I was a complete outsider. Yeah, that's what happened. And that was the turning point for me, was like, okay, cool, I need to be somewhere where I belong, So that's when I made my trip to Kenya, and I felt wanted, everyone was black, everyone was African, so I blended in quite nicely, and there was no issues, So having that sense of belonging in Kenya made me feel so happy that, it made me consider a permanent option to eventually live in Kenya. Another reason is that because I'm Nigerian, I was thinking of getting the Nigerian passport, but the Nigerian passport is not really strong. Like, I'm not really able to get a lot of access to different African countries. Like, for example, I think if you're Nigerian, if you have a Nigerian passport, to go to Kenya, you still have to apply for a visa. And, just me looking at the visa, the visa access for Nigerian passports, because it wasn't the best, because it wasn't the best, I wasn't really considering it. I'm probably going to get it eventually, just because it's nice to have another passport, But the reason why I chose Kenya is because I have more access to African countries, and I would be able to travel around Africa as well. It has more visa-free destinations. I can go to South Africa, I can go to East Africa, and I'm not going to require a visa. And because it's more stronger, in the global ranking, the Kenyan passport is more stronger. I have access to more countries around the world. So that's why I was considering, the Kenyan passport. So the whole process of looking at this option, looking at Kenya for getting a citizenship in Kenya, the whole process, it taught me that getting a citizenship in Kenya is not as easy as it might seem. You need to consider the pros and the cons of the decision that you're making. And it can be difficult because, of the life that you was living back in your home country. And for me, that was the UK. I had to think about what were the possible complications, the outcomes of my decision. For example, let's say that I wanted to completely cut all ties from the UK. Like, I don't want the passport anymore. I just want a African passport. If I was to do that, I'm not saying that you should do that, and obviously, to be fair, I think that before you do anything like that, you need to think about it and you need to weigh your options before you do this, So that's one thing I would tell you. I'm not telling you to completely, just cancel your citizenship in your home country. No, I'm saying that you need to weigh your options. So, for example, let's say that you don't want to be a UK citizen. You want to completely cut all ties. It made me realize that, okay, I need to think about, for example, if I don't have my UK passport anymore, I can't really get the same opportunity that I did, like before. Let's say that I want to go and work in the UK. Let's say that, okay, things in Kenya hasn't worked out, I've completely lost all my money, I need to go back to the UK and I might need to work, with my passport. And me not having my UK passport anymore, it just limits the amount of opportunities that I would get, and that can affect my future as well. But if you're making money, if you're making passive income, let's say you have property investments in the UK, you know, you can always go to Kenya, and you know that property is going to be earning you, yearly income, you know, annual income, guaranteed rent. So you have to understand that there's no one strategy that is good for every situation, you know. Every situation has a different outcome, needs a different strategy. So what would I do in this situation? You know, this is not financial advice, it's not investment advice, but what I would do is, in the future, to be fair, I still see myself using my UK passport, just because it's still a strong passport, and it still gives me plenty of advantages. Like, I can pretty much go anywhere in the world, and I can go to any country that I want. And if I don't like the UK, I can always just go and get Kenyan residency, and then which will eventually lead me to get the citizenship. So yeah, this is the end of the video. If you want to be inspired, motivated to move to Kenya, to move to Africa, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and also if you have anything to say, you know, are you looking to get residency? Are you looking to get a visa? Please do let me know down in the comments. And yeah, peace.